Victoria had always felt at ease in shadows until the Appalachians revealed that obscurity could whisper secrets of its own. Raised in eastern Kentucky, where underground caverns dotted the landscape as frequently as spires on houses of worship, she had, by age 26, navigated countless tight squeezes and low-bellied crawls, convinced she knew the subterranean world's ways inside out. Icy drafts, slippery rock faces, the distant murmur of hidden streams in pitch blackness. Nothing otherworldly, just the raw results of Earth's slow sculpting. That confidence alone prompted her to join a handful of regional adventurers exploring a site locals dubbed Chapel Hollow. Officially uncharted on any survey, Chapel Hollow appeared above ground as little more than an overgrown depression amid abandoned mining territory, surrounded by tulip poplars and weathered barriers. Its notoriety stemmed from the lore attached to it. Elders recalled a long-gone tent revival outpost perched on that slope before paths realigned and worshippers relocated nearer civilization. Legend held that during one rainy season, a landslide swallowed part of the structure amid a tempest, dragging the font for immersions and sections of the singer's platform into the void. As decades passed, the tale evolved. Some claimed the minister was mid-sermon on divine retribution when the soil split. Others insisted an entire assembly of voices vanished with the crumbling foundation. Consensus eluded the particulars, yet the caution remained universal. Steer clear of any melodies echoing around Chapel Hollow. As a child, Victoria dismissed such yarns with a scoff, favoring precise charts and field records over neighborhood tales. But when a fellow caver messaged her about a fresh opening, potentially linking to an undocumented maze under the former sanctuary grounds, her intrigue overrode caution. The prospect of charting virgin territory in that fabled expanse stirred her drive to outpace others. She gathered her equipment, verified her primary headlamp, reserves, extra power cells, and protective headgear, then rendezvoused with the team near dusk at the path's start. Intentionally compact in number, the crew included the coordinator, a reserved fellow in his 30s called Mark, a veteran of probing uncharted routes in the area. Jen, a lean expert in setting up descents for steep shafts, rounded out the core. Cole, a novice with shiny new gear and unchecked enthusiasm, arrived too, his zeal concerning Victoria more than the depths ahead. She'd witnessed rash rookies falter in confined spaces before. After introductions and mutual inspections of supplies, they trailed Mark up a subtle game path ascending the elevation. The pit gaped from the slope like jaws weary from yawning. Vegetation draped its rim while a slender trickle fell from an invisible source, striking fractured stone in a steady, echoing pulse. Mark indicated a squat fissure in the barrier, scarcely reaching waist height, exhaling cool obscurity like drifting haze. That marked their way in. Securing illuminations, they performed one last protocol review before slipping sequentially beyond the moist barrier into the depths. The air turned frigid right away, swapping muggy evening warmth for a penetrating cold that invaded Victoria's padding and coverings. The route slanted mildly initially, a gradual chute where their steps resounded in orderly echoes. Her light swept over rippled formations, draping calcite veils and ghostly pale insects huddled in fissures. That well-known transition stirred within her, the pivot from topside chaos to below-ground purity. Surface life buzzed with distraction. Here, existence distilled to beam, rock, and respiration. They advanced one behind the other. Leading the way was Mark, followed by Victoria, then Cole, with Jen bringing up the back. 10 minutes in, the route constricted to a tight belly crawl on all fours, the sort that silenced any talk and sharpened focus on each cautious shift forward. As dust swirled beneath Victoria's gloves, her mind wandered to how much time had passed for it to accumulate since the previous inundation. Generations of rushing currents had sculpted the overhead just tall enough for their passage. Following one more constricted twist, the conduit suddenly widened into a compact cavern, spacious enough for them to rise to their full height. The ground inclined downward to a shadowy basin that absorbed their beams without so much as a quiver. Underscore. Quote, underscore 0. Underscore, underscore. Mark noted, his tone subdued yet firm. Quote 1. The atmosphere carried an unfamiliar scent here, not merely the sharp mineral edge she anticipated, but a subtle earthy hint, reminiscent of aged books stored in a musty cellar. Victoria inched nearer to the basin, ensuring her footwear stayed planted on firm stone. The water lay utterly calm, glassy as a reflection. It unsettled her that the opposite side remained invisible. Her beam dissolved into a murky haze that seemed denser than liquid ought to be. She was on the verge of retreating when the noise reached her. Initially, she dismissed it as a lingering tinnitus from the exertion, that piercing ethereal hum that trailed intense exertion. But then it resolved into harmonies, clear tones intertwining and undulating in unison. This wasn't the sporadic patter of droplets she'd encountered in prior grottos. It formed a tune. She halted abruptly, her body tensing against the urge to bolt. The music was subdued, as if filtering through multiple barriers, yet the rhythm was unmistakable. It was choral. Multiple singers harmonizing on a melody that vaguely echoed the antique spirituals her grandmother displayed on the living room shelf. The group around her went motionless. For several heartbeats, they all remained quiet. The harmony persisted, flowing steadily and confidently from beyond the inky depths. Cole broke the hush with a murmur, wondering about a nearby access point, or perhaps another group navigating the network. Mark denied it with a gradual shake, his headlamp sweeping over the glistening surfaces. The closest documented entry lay miles distant, and this zone wasn't mapped in any records. Jen grumbled that subterranean acoustics could play odd tricks, possibly from flowing streams over stone or drafts in adjacent vents. Her rationale made sense, though her delivery suggested self-doubt. The tune modulated, climbing a semitone, like a phantom assembly rising as one. Goosebumps rose beneath Victoria's insulated suit. She disliked how indifferent the singing appeared to their presence. No interruption, no hesitation, merely a fluid progression of sustained vocal lines. Unbidden, she tallied the parts, around 5 or 6 separate threads, all mature timbres, none juvenile. They were far too structured to stem from reverberations of their own words. They hadn't uttered much to generate such residue. "We need to capture this on tape," Victoria declared at last, steadying her pitch. If it's merely liquid or air currents, the recording will reveal it. Otherwise, we'll analyze it topside. Mark agreed and retrieved a compact audio device from a waterproof slot on his gear. He positioned it atop a level outcrop by the basin's rim, the indicator glowing faintly as it logged the audio. Over the following 60 seconds, they lingered wordlessly, their lights reduced to minimal glow to conserve power, while the invisible ensemble continued its performance. The piece held its course without a hitch, cycling through a stanza, swelling into a refrain, then repeating, as if rehearsed over years. Victoria's exhalations condensed visibly before her. The cold had intensified unnoticed, seeping into her core. Startled, she observed that the liquid had advanced, a slim, icy band now lapping at her boot edges. She edged away deliberately and observed. Gradually, another segment of shadow advanced across the slab. No disturbance marked it, no surface disturbance. The basin was simply expanding. "That's sufficient," Jen stated softly. "Time to go. Could be a live drain pulling this in." They withdrew in line along the cavern's side, dodging the encroaching flood until the gradient lifted them upward and onward into the subsequent conduit. The melody trailed them initially, dulled yet audible, as though gnawing through the bedrock to stay near. Abruptly, it halted in mid-sentence. The ensuing quiet weighed more oppressively than the music had. The upcoming stretch tightened once more, compelling a lateral sidestep along the wall. Further on, the formation compressed into a narrow gap that Mark assured would lead to yet another space. Victoria concentrated on her respiration and the texture of the stone against her hands. It seemed unyielding, detached, precisely the reassurance she sought. As she approached the narrowest section, where her helmet just barely scraped through, a different noise enveloped her. It was that same melody, but nearer now, as though the voices had emerged from beyond the rock barrier and were positioned right around the corner, expectant. Yet something felt off about it. The rhythm aligned with the initial tune, but the primary singer was unfamiliar, one she hadn't encountered prior. It turned out to be hers. The awareness hit her like a chill rush. The guiding tone echoed her rhythm, her subtle drawl from the Appalachians on specific syllables. It came across serene, nearly soothing, uttering lyrics she couldn't discern yet instinctively recognized as emerging from lips identical to her own. For a moment, she froze, the walls bearing down on her shoulders, the ground firm beneath her boots, while a queasy plunge gripped her gut, as if she'd plunged into a void. "Hear that?" Cole shouted from the rear, his words strained. "Vic, that's your voice!" She propelled herself onward, her sides grinding against the rough surface. Anything to escape that constriction where her spectral echo directed the chorus. The tunnel ejected her into a taller passage where she could crouch rather than compress. The chant intensified alongside her progress, as if sinking to her motions. She itched to yank off her helmet to confirm it was all in her mind, but her practical side held firm to protocol. Never shed equipment below ground. Maintain 3 points of stability. Press on. Upon entering the subsequent cavern, a shallow space overhead with delicate stalactites, the vocals ceased as suddenly as earlier. Her duplicate timbre halted mid-note, replaced solely by their ragged breaths and the remote trickle of liquid. Mark appeared ashen in the beam of their headlamps. Cole kept peering rearward along the route, as if anticipating pursuit. They lingered only briefly. Without discussion, they ditched the intended path, concluding that the intrigue drawing them inward was now quenched. The exit seemed to stretch on forever compared to the ingress. Each grind and a rattle resounded excessively. Twice, Victoria sensed a subtle buzz trailing her, the onset of that tune rise unbidden within her throat. Each instance, she tamped it back and zeroed in on the upcoming grip. Above ground, the atmosphere struck her as overly balmy and luminous. They doffed their helmets and settled onto the moist turf near the sinkhole, forming an informal ring. Silence hung for a few minutes. At last, Mark retrieved the device from his pack and placed it amid them. The indicator light had quit flashing since departing the submerged area. He hit playback. Static-free boot shuffles and adjustments emerged first. Then, crisp as if the performers hovered next to the mic, the hymn commenced. The fidelity was impeccable. No fuzz, no interference. A shiver raced across Victoria's flesh. Overlapping tones ebbed and flowed in unison. Perhaps 6 or 7 participants. No improvisation. The flow mirrored her recollection precisely. As the audio hit the transition to the solo, she tensed. From the small output, her voice flowed confidently, intoning phrases she'd never encountered. Cole muttered a curse and retreated. Jen fixed her gaze on the player, teeth gritted. Mark allowed it to conclude, then reset and replayed, his stare distant. The liquid on the cavern base wasn't mere fancy. In the capture, a gentle sloshing amplified gradually with the music, suggesting the basin swelled in rhythm to the refrain. Victoria lay awake that evening. Shutting her eyes transported her to the pinch, boulders closing in everywhere, attuned to her unseen choir's direction from her own form. For weeks, snippets of the air infiltrated everyday echoes. The drone of her fridge, a far-off locomotive's keen, the hush of circulation in the office ducts. The complete piece never resurfaced, yet it lingered beneath ambient layers, poised. She played the file just once for a veteran explorer who'd charted networks over 3 regions and dismissed unsurveyable phenomena. He absorbed it stoically, returned it, and murmured that Chapel Hollow had been taboo long before her cohort donned gear. Folks had ventured after that allure, and not all returned. Afterward, Victoria forsook constricted routes. She limited herself to tourist caverns and expansive halls, where shadows seemed expansive voids rather than looming entities. The player remained stowed away, power cells extracted. But on tranquil evenings when the settlement hushed and the ridges loomed as dark silhouettes against the stars, she imagined a soft ensemble ascending from the earth. After the event unfolded, she switched on every lamp throughout her home and assured herself that echoes could behave oddly amid the peaks, particularly when the ground harbored melodies it hadn't yet released. Andrew had long been the type who couldn't leave matters unresolved. Books left unopened grated on him. Puzzles only partially cracked gnawed at his thoughts like embedded shards. In his early 20s, when he first delved into caving, that urge discovered its perfect channel in the unexplored corridors snaking along the Appalachian ridges like overlooked arteries. By age 38, he had supplied mapping details to 3 prominent cave networks and built a stand-in in the local circle as the explorer who'd chase a promising route until it broadened or terminated forever. Fame wasn't his goal. He chased it simply because partial diagrams struck him as lingering riddles, and such riddles squeezed his rib cage. The outpost in Shawnee National Forest held no promise of excitement. Andrew swung by on a Tuesday afternoon during late October, biding time until he could join a friend to scout a recent sinkhole portal close to the Virginia line. The ranger working, a lady in her 50s marked by sun-worn complexion and fatigued stare, was replenishing informational flyers when Andrew inquired about any overlooked cave complexes in the vicinity that deserved charting. She froze, her palm lingering above a batch of route diagrams, then slipped away into an inner office silently. She came back bearing one protected paper in a clear folder, wrinkled and browned along the rims. She laid it on the surface dividing them, yet gripped it for a beat. The diagram was sketched by hand using dim blue pen, crammed with pathways and labels that whirled over the surface in a pattern Andrew spotted at once as the output of a dedicated spelunker. It included depth notations, directional angles, and minute comments on mineral compositions and stream patterns. Yet, along the upper margin, in heavy red marker that seemed added long after the initial lines, stark capitals declared, "Do not use incomplete hazardous." Andrew bent in nearer, following the paths visually. The network began at a familiar access point he recalled from official Forest Service logs. But mere hundreds of feet along, the routes forked into a labyrinth unrelated to any standard mappings. Certain shafts ended abruptly, while others circled back in configurations that defied spatial logic. A handful just faded beyond the page's boundary without hinting at their direction. The ranger at last let go of the diagram and folded her arms. She explained it had been submitted by a trekker roughly 15 years prior, discovered folded inside a container by the primary access. Its creator remained unknown. The specifics were far too intricate for mere jest. Still, when mapping crews attempted to trace it, the routes failed to align. Measurements proved inaccurate. Reference points vanished. Following reports from 2 teams of confusion and close calls, officials chose to file it away and label the network too risky for casual ventures. She shared it with him solely due to his noted caution, figuring he might appreciate the reason behind some off-limits zones. Andrew snapped a picture of the diagram using his cell, expressed gratitude, and departed. He convinced himself it was mere intrigue. Likely, some disoriented wanderer had sketched it from recall, patching holes with speculation. Such errors cropped up more frequently than folks cared to confess. Human recollection made for a flawed cartographer, though the intricacy nagged at him. The strokes carried undue assurance, excessive accuracy. It resembled an on-the-spot rendering, not a pieced-together afterthought. 2 days afterward, Andrew entered solo. He shared his destination with nobody. It was a choice whose repercussions would unfold in ways beyond his foresight. Yet then, it struck him as sensible. His intent was merely to probe the initial corridors, verify if they aligned with the diagram, perhaps prove its flaws to quiet his mind. He left his vehicle at the path start right at first light, equipped minimally with a lightweight bag, head protection, dual headlamps, spare power cells, hydration, and a printed diagram version tucked in waterproof wrapping. The entry was a shallow sideways fissure in a rock face, partly screened by rhododendron thickets and barely broad enough for belly crawling through. The breeze emerging carried a crisp chill, laced with the subtle earthy bite of profound rock. Andrew secured his headgear, activated his main beam, and dragged himself into the blackness. The opening segment followed the diagram to a T. A tight squeeze widened into a strollable corridor where the overhead height dropped from 8 feet to 4 across 20 yards. On the left side stood a stone shape evoking a halted cascade positioned precisely as marked. A spark of validation hit Andrew. The artist had truly navigated these depths. The charting might fall short, but it stemmed from reality, not fabrication. He pressed on into the depths, consulting his compass and tallying his steps to match them with the map's indications. The corridors branched and converged in a way that seemed deliberate, as if the cavern had been engineered instead of eroded by natural forces. Each intersection aligned perfectly. Each bend arrived precisely as indicated. 30 minutes later, Andrew arrived at a modest cavity marked as Junction 4 on the diagram. The sketch depicted 3 outlets branching off. He located everyone effortlessly. That's when the initial alteration caught his eye. Retrieving the map from his backpack to select his next route, the sheet felt off in his grip, not moist, not damaged, simply incorrect. He laid it out on a boulder and directed his beam toward the middle. The familiar routes remained along with all the initial markings in ink, yet something fresh had emerged. A 4th conduit branching from Junction 4, drawn in matching blue ink accompanied by a scribbled remark, followed this 11:47 a.m. Andrew glanced at his wristwatch. It read 11:51. His breathing hitched. He reversed the map, scanning for any rationale. A duplicate layer adhered by mistake, perhaps. Nothing. The reverse side was empty. Flipping it once more, the added route persisted, and a 6th marking had materialized, captioned, "Came back here 11:53. Tremors seized his fingers. He scanned the chamber's surfaces, tallying the openings. Only 3 persisted. Andrew reasoned it must be an optical illusion or exhaustion distorting his senses. He'd been fixated on that map for days on end. Perhaps his mind was inventing elements that weren't present. He refolded the sheet with precision and tucked it away, resolving to retreat. But as he pivoted toward his entryway, uncertainty clouded his memory of which path it was. They blended indistinguishably now. Sleek limestone conduits vanishing into darkness. He extracted the map once more, compelling composure. The primary access path ought to be indicated. He spotted it, followed the line back to Junction 4, and dread knotted his gut. The diagram now depicted his arrival via an aperture absent from the space. Even more alarming, it placed him at Junction 6, not 4. The room's identifier had shifted during the brief stowage. Andrew pressed his spine to the stone, his lantern sweeping across the overhead and ground, hunting for any recognizable trait to ground himself. The stone offered no clues. It was uniformly unyielding. He examined the map anew. A fresh annotation had surfaced near Junction 6, penned in his tight script. "Do not trust the Count. Rooms repeat." He hadn't inscribed that. He was certain recollection would have surfaced. Yet the ink aligned with his chest pocket pen, and the lettering's angle was undeniably his. Dread nipped at his concentration's borders. He suppressed it and advanced, opting for the broadest corridor since it intuitively promised progress. The shaft wound softly, descending before flattening and expanding into a broader cavity. This spanned roughly 15 feet wide, with a vault so elevated his illumination scarcely touched it. Instinctively, he consulted the map. The space was documented, tagged as Junction 9, with a notation of 12:41 p.m. adjacent. His timepiece displayed 12:15. The chart was evolving live, charting routes as he traversed them, logging his actions prior to their occurrence. Andrew attempted to rip the sheet apart to eliminate it, but his grip refused. Deep down, he clung to its role as his sole escape guide. The routes began melding indistinctly. He trudged onward for what seemed endless, verifying the map at each fork. And invariably it revealed uncharted territory. Unvisited enclosures materialized with exhaustive specifics. Untraveled shafts were flagged as impasses or cycles. Margins brimmed with entries in his script, outlining unspoken anxieties and unformed choices. One entry stated, _quote_11, _Andrew stumbled upon Junction 12, unintentionally. It mirrored every prior enclosure he'd navigated. 3 outlets, unmarred surfaces, 0 unique markers. He positioned himself centrally and rotated gradually, his beam gliding across unresponsive rock. The third route appeared no distinct from its counterparts, yet his limbs drew him there regardless, driven by the grim compulsion to test the map's prophecy. The conduit constricted as he progressed, the roof descending until stooping gave way to scrambling, his headgear grating against the stone while his gasps erupted in chilly wisps. The path terminated sharply against an unbroken barrier. No extension, no fissure for passage, just impenetrable stone. Andrew settled onto his haunches and consulted the map for the final instance. The surface was now saturated with his script, thickly interwoven annotations, coiling inward to the core. Much of the handwriting was illegible, filled with wild scribbles and scratched-out phrases. Yet amid the chaos, one line stood out in precise, blocky capitals. "Home lies behind every door you shut." He had no recollection of dragging himself back outside. His first vivid recollection after that was the harsh morning light piercing his eyes like knives as rescuers yanked him from the opening. A passerby hiking nearby had spotted his vehicle and realized it had sat there untouched for 2 full days, prompting a call to search and rescue. They discovered him huddled in a shallow alcove barely inside the mouth of the cave, not even 50 feet below the surface, fetal-like with the map gripped tightly in his fingers. Efforts to pry it loose revealed nothing but emptiness. The page was pristine, devoid of any writing or marks, merely a faded scrap of paper. Andrew never ventured below ground again. Instead, he settled into a camper van, embarking on endless loops through the national parks. Refusing to linger anywhere beyond a handful of days. Indoor sleeping was out of the question for him. Visitors attempting to check in on him noticed he always wedged every door of the van ajar, regardless of the season's chill or downpours. Pressed for an explanation, he'd merely shake his head and murmur that the final passage was still out there, biding its time. He claimed it had already mapped his inevitable path, scripted in his very own script. Sooner or later, he'd swing open the incorrect door and discover himself once more at that threshold, chart in grasp, poised to complete the journey he'd begun. Those who knew him from earlier days recalled his relentless drive to see tasks through to the end. Now they spoke of it with sorrow, observing as he fixated on shut doors at filling stations or markets, his palm lingering near the knob, mouth whispering as though tallying unseen strides. Certain urges, it turned out, weren't built for fulfillment. Certain guides weren't crafted to guide you free. They existed to reveal that escape was never on the table. The sole unfinished element was your grasp on just how deeply entrenched you'd become. Natalie returned to Cridge convinced that tales could preserve it. The community had been fading gradually her entire life, hemorrhaging residents with each count until only the elderly or the unyielding remained. At 18, she'd escaped, heading to Asheville for university, where she studied video editing and the archiving of oral histories, then dedicated 10 years to capturing the decline of other fading hamlets on film. Yet Cridge belonged to her. That spring, after her grandmother passed and bequeathed the family home on Pigger Street, Natalie resolved to direct her lens toward the town that had shaped her. The endeavor seemed straightforward enough. Gather the area's folklore from those who still held it, before memory faded entirely. Transform them into an online film, a virtual tribute to a settlement soon to vanish from the map. She began with the straightforward myths, the eerie orbs along the railway lines, the spectral lady in white who roamed the gravesite path. But the lantern man was what turned grins to unease, what had folks glancing downward at their palms. Like so much in Cridge, the legend traced back to the mines. In 1933, a portion of the Blackwell seam gave way amid a crew transition. 18 workers plunged in, 12 resurfaced. The formal inquiry cited faulty rock formations and inadequate airflow. The kin pointed fingers at the operators for dismissing hazard reports. Regardless, 6 souls remained entombed beneath 100 feet of stone and fuel, and the operation shut down for good. Time wore on. The portal got barricaded, machinery carted away for salvage, and the wilderness reclaimed the slope. Still, relatives persisted in sharing glimpses from the disaster's yearly mark. They dubbed him the Lantern Man for the beacon, a faint, unwavering amber flicker drifting amid the branches by the disused Blackwell entry. Some figured it was a lost soul from the entombed crew, still seeking daylight. Others suspected an ancient entity stirred by picks that pierced too far. Consensus held on its method, though. The gleam didn't meander without aim. It navigated deliberately, steering a few wanderers toward the path's start and refuge, while luring others further into the brush where the earth shifted treacherously and forgotten air holes might yawn beneath your boots unannounced. Natalie taped 3 accounts from witnesses. The initial came from Earl, a septuagenarian whose dad had been among the dozen who emerged. Earl recounted a solo trek to the derelict spot in his 20s, buzzed and inquisitive, only to lose his bearings in the gloom. He caught sight of the glow and trailed it for a good 20 minutes, then grasped it was looping him near an unseen depression in the ground. When he halted and shouted, the light pulsed twice before vanishing. He stumbled to his pickup right as the sun rose, trembling too violently to start the engine. The follow-up interview featured Doris, a former schoolteacher, who insisted she'd witnessed the glow guiding rescuers to a missing hiker back in 1987. The man had sprained his ankle and taken shelter inside an outdated entryway tunnel to escape the downpour. Without that glow halting right above the opening and lingering there, the team might never have spotted it, and he could have succumbed to the elements. Doris described the glow as purposeful and tolerant, as if it was giving them a moment to grasp its signal. It was the next conversation that started keeping Natalie awake at night. Patricia, who was notably younger, in her 50s, shared an account involving her relative who'd ventured to the Blackwell area in 2003 on a foolish teenage challenge. He returned after 3 hours, ashen-faced and tight-lipped about his encounter. Just 2 weeks on, he slammed his vehicle into a solid divider along Route 9, going 60 miles per hour. There were no tire tracks, no sign of braking. The medical exam revealed no issues, no substances, no booze. Yet Patricia was convinced otherwise. She believed the glow had assessed him and deemed him unworthy, revealing something atop the hill that convinced him he shouldn't return. When Natalie pressed about what her relative had done to warrant such a fate, Patricia met her gaze with a lifeless stare and replied, quote 12. She clammed up after that. Defying all the instincts she'd honed from shooting in remote spots, Natalie resolved to visit the Blackwell location on her own. She rationalized it as essential for the documentary, to capture footage of the site for interview context. But deep down, she aimed to determine if these tales were just sorrow and chance cloaked in myth. She recruited 2 old college buddies, Marcus and Jay, who'd assisted on past projects and knew how to navigate forests stealthily with gear in tow. They dismissed it as a mix of old wives' tales and gimmicky outings, and Natalie let their assumptions stand. They trekked upward on a crisp Saturday dusk in early November, tracing a weed-choked old lumber path that wound through stands of oak and pine before hitting a dead end at a long-neglected chain-link barrier. The fencing drooped in spots, corroded elsewhere, with a weathered placard attached to the entry proclaiming, "Danger! Abandoned mine! No trespassing!" Past it, the terrain climbed in a stony incline to a level patch where the foliage grew sparse, and the dirt appeared churned, shadowed, and softer than the nearby ground. Slipping past a break in the barrier, they ascended to the remnant of the original pit mouth. It was largely debris now, a concrete edge partially sunk in lichen and decayed foliage, topped by a metal cover fastened across the void. Chilly drafts wafted upward from the depths, bearing an odor of damp rock and corrosion. Natalie positioned her camera on a stand and began recording the surroundings as Marcus and Jay scouted the edges for anything noteworthy. The glow appeared right as daylight faded beyond the crest. Initially, Natalie figured it was a reflection from Marcus's flashlight, catching on some branch. But he was off to her side, while this was forward and off-center, perhaps 70 yards higher on the hill. Its hue was amber, unlike the stark gleam of modern bulbs, and it didn't shift like footsteps would. Instead, it oscillated softly side to side, reminiscent of a lamp swung from an extended pole. Jay spotted it moments later and shouted, wondering if another visitor was nearby. The glow offered no reply. It simply kept its leisurely path alongside them, holding steady without drawing nearer or pulling back. Natalie dialed in closer on her lens for clarity, yet the image refused to sharpen. Visually, it remained crisp, but through the screen, it dissolved into haze. Despite her tweaks to the controls, Marcus began heading its way. She urged him to halt, but he brushed it aside, suggesting it was likely just a fellow trekker or ranger on rounds. Advancing uphill with his beam active, he hailed a hello. The amber glow ceased its motion. It paused utterly motionless for an instant, then pulsed, once, twice, thrice, in a measured rhythm. Afterward, it accelerated, veering sharply across the incline and distancing itself. Marcus pursued. Natalie called for him to remain close, but he was already 20 yards out, his beam jerking as he scrambled over toppled timber and scattered stones. Jay swore under his breath and dashed after. Natalie stood isolated by her setup, with the chill exhalation from the blocked passage at her feet. She continued shooting, sweeping the lens to track the pair of beams, pursuing the amber gleam higher up the ridge. They vanished beyond an outcrop, and for 5 minutes all she caught was the rustle of breeze through limbs and the faint groan of trunks easing. Then, Marcus's call rang out, strained and urgent, summoning them to hurry up. Natalie snatched the camera from its tripod and dashed away, her boots skidding over slick foliage as twigs snagged her coat. Reaching the top of the hill, she spotted Marcus and Jay positioned near a dip in the terrain, both gazing intently into a shadowy opening barely larger than a sewer lid. The amber glow lingered right above it, suspended about 5 feet in the air without a twitch. She joined them and peered inside. It dropped into a straight vertical chute, one of those ancient air shafts Earl had talked about. The rim was fraying and precarious. A single misstep in the blackness could have sent anyone plummeting right in. Marcus had halted just under 3 feet away from the brink. The glow flickered once, then shot upward into the treetops and disappeared. No gradual dimming, no wandering, just poof, gone. The trio remained rooted there, hearts pounding. Eyes fixed on the pit that had nearly claimed one of them. Jay whispered what the glow might have been up to. Natalie stayed silent, convinced she had an idea, and it turned her stomach. It had been tracking Marcus, holding back to check if he'd tumble in. They trekked downhill wordlessly, and that evening, in her grandmother's kitchen, Natalie scanned the video. The amber light appeared sharp in the initial 30 seconds, gliding amid the branches, vivid and undeniable. Then it pulsed, and right as Marcus began trailing it, the recording split the light into 2 separate points. One pressed onward uphill, the other lingered by the blocked mine portal, aimed straight at where Natalie stood, as if observing her observation of it. She abandoned the endeavor after that. The recorded talks lingered on her drive, but she never assembled them into a proper piece. A month on, Marcus perished in a vehicle crash near Knoxville. He'd been solo on a sunny afternoon when his car veered over the median and smashed into an approaching semi. The official report found no engine issues or evidence of inattention. Jay rang Natalie that very night after she learned the news, his tone trembling, questioning if she recalled Patricia's words about her relative. Natalie did. She's remained in Cridge, though the filming days are over, on the anniversary of the Blackwell Cave-In each year. She strolls along the disused logging path and pauses by the barrier, staring at the plugged entrance. The glow hasn't reappeared, yet she ponders those dual signals on her tape, the one shadowing Marcus, the other fixed in place. She speculates if it's lingering still, steady and amber amid the shadows, poised to gauge the next visitor and judge if they merit its guidance out or its verdict otherwise. The kinfolk were spot on about something. The lantern figure does guide folks free, but solely those it deems worthy. Michael had been aiding the local search and rescue unit for 6 years when the sinkhole yawned open on the Morrison land. It formed sometime during mid-April overnight, a chunk of meadow caving in and dragging along part of a fence and one bewildered bovine. The animal pulled through with just a fractured limb, better than anticipated. Still, the crater summoned Michael and his crew on a Saturday morn when they'd all preferred other pursuits. Such collapses were routine in Appalachian terrain, so they followed procedure. Cordon off the site, gauge its depth, check for ties to existing caverns, and evaluate threats to nearby spots. Michael descended first, thanks to his superior rigging skills and his ease in confined areas unlike some teammates. The plunge measured almost 40 feet vertically through reddish soil and rock, widening into a corridor from an evidently ancient cavern network. His helmet beam picked up a shimmer of liquid below, a shallow basin over jagged rock, and the atmosphere carried the usual cave scent. Chilly, moist, laced with minerals. No surprises. He signaled topside that it seemed solid for another to join. While awaiting support, he surveyed the surroundings. The corridor stretched both ways, tight but passable, with an overhead height fluctuating from 6 to 10 feet. Leftward, it dipped toward the murmur of flowing liquid. Rightward, it ascended mildly before bending from view. As Michael inspected the stone features by the basin, his beam grazed an object that froze him in place. Up on the opposite side, roughly 12 feet aloft, sat a shelf, and atop it, lined up precisely, lay skeletal remains. From his vantage, he made out 4 craniums, all oriented outward to the corridor's heart, with the clear outlines of torsos and femurs arranged in sitting poses beneath. They weren't strewn like flood-tossed animal relics. No, they'd been arranged with intent and care, like someone had paused to pose them deliberately. Michael's throat constricted as he stared at the discovery. His experience in recovery operations made it clear. These were unmistakably human bones. When the second team member, Carol, descended to the bottom, Michael had already snapped initial photographs and logged the site's GPS coordinates. She glanced at the outcrop and immediately contacted the sheriff over the radio. The situation changed in an instant. What started as a routine sinkhole evaluation had transformed into a full-blown crime scene, with them right at its heart. Deputies from the sheriff's office showed up less than an hour later, trailed by state police forensics experts. Michael remained underground to assist, directing their attention to the ledge and noting how impossible it seemed for anyone to reach it without gear. The sheer rock surface, smoothed by constant water flow, offered no natural grips. Clearly, the person who deposited those bones had relied on ropes or a ladder, indicating forethought and skill. One forensics technician, a reserved fellow called Stevens, inquired whether the cave network appeared on official maps. Michael explained that it wasn't listed in local records. To his knowledge, this tunnel had stayed blocked from all recognized access points until the sinkhole exposed it. They set up a portable ladder, and Stevens ascended for a closer inspection of the remains. From his position below, Michael directed his headlamp toward the shelf to improve the lighting. The bones appeared ancient, Stevens reported, likely several decades old, judging by their hue and state, though lab tests would confirm it. More unsettling, though, was their positioning. Every skeleton leaned against the wall, legs stretched out, hands folded in laps, skulls oriented uniformly and angled faintly toward the pool beneath, as though fixated on something in the depths. Stevens collected specimens and took detailed shots, proceeding with careful precision, until he uncovered the first anomaly that clashed with the age of the bones. Nestled under one skeleton lay a loop of vivid yellow nylon rope, the type favored for contemporary climbing. It lacked any notable wear, mold, or degradation that decades in the damp would cause. Lifting it in his gloved grip, Stevens peered down at Michael, his features conveying the unspoken truth. This rope was new, perhaps no more than a few years old. Someone had ventured into this place well after the deaths occurred. The exploration widened over the following 2 days. Forensics personnel scoured the tunnel in both directions, cataloging every detail. Additional signs of recent visits emerged. Fresh boot impressions in the parched mud beside a branch passage, deeply etched with a sole design from a common tactical boot line introduced just 5 years prior. A cluster of 6 cigarette filters, sheltered in a tiny niche shielded from drips. The brand remained in production, a plastic bottle bearing a capped timestamp from 3 years back. And in a narrow belly crawl section that forced Michael to wriggle through on his stomach, they discovered a notebook. It was encased in a watertight pouch, similar to those employed by kayakers. The pages held scrawled entries, dates, timestamps, and grid references. Michael instantly identified the style. It mirrored the logs his team kept for search and rescue missions. The record spanned 7 years, noting sites across the area like caves, sinkholes, and abandoned mine workings. Next to most were annotations like clear or no access. Yet 3 stood out, one tied to the Morrison property, marked with a check and the term suitable. A wave of nausea hit Michael. He handed the notebook to Stevens, whose expression darkened as he scanned the contents. A deputy identified the script, but kept the owner's identity under wraps, instead drawing the sheriff into a hushed discussion that halted all activity as others observed tensely. Upon returning, the sheriff instructed the group to gather their gear and vacate the area. The probe was intensifying, and their participation had ended. That evening, Michael returned home unable to rest. His mind replayed the ledge, the deliberate setup of the skeletons, the evident effort to arrange them with such precision. It wasn't haphazard or a hasty cover-up. The placement felt deliberate, ritualistic even, and the perpetrator had returned repeatedly, perhaps to check on things, preserve the setup, or even expand it. 3 weeks on, the sheriff's office disclosed an inquiry into potential wrongdoing in the search and rescue unit. Identities stayed confidential, but a longtime team member, the founder who had orchestrated numerous rescues, stepped down without fanfare. Michael picked up whispers from unofficial sources that authorities had raided the guy's home, uncovering detailed topo maps inked with red marks on caves. Far too many for any routine search and rescue ops. Officially, those bones perched on the outcrop were chalked up to wanderers and long-gone missing folks from way back. Folks who'd tumbled into the cavern network via entrances long since caved in. Sad ends, sure, but nothing sinister. The file got slapped with quote 17 and shut tight. Yet Michael couldn't shake what his eyes had witnessed. That rope was fresh, the cigarette stubs were current, and the notebook screamed deliberate tracking of these spots. Plus, he was aware that SAR volunteers could pull reports on vanished hikers and campers in wild spots, cases that fizzled out without clues or corpses. He stuck with the crew another year, but now he zeroed in on details he'd overlooked. How particular teammates jumped at certain call-outs, how searches wrapped up prematurely, how gear or finds vanished from base camps before logging. He began his own discreet log, snapping pics and jotting observations on the sly. That winter, when a fresh sinkhole yawned open close to the Tennessee line, Michael rappelled in first and spotted the identical setup. A dry perch stocked with neatly lined bones. No official alert this round. Instead, he fired the shots off to a Knoxville reporter digging into unsolved mysteries and official misconduct. The expose dropped 4 months on, sparking a federal probe. It snagged 2 more SAR guys plus a washed-up deputy who'd orchestrated ops for over 10 years. Body count hit 11 officially. Though Michael figured deeper caches lurked in unbreached caves, biding time till the next collapse or deluge unearthed them. Post-busts, he bailed on the team. Ropes turned his stomach now. A radio buzz on a lost trekker always sparked doubts about pre-planned dump sites. He relocated to some level cityscape, cave-free landing desk work that boxed him in from the peaks. Still, that initial ledge haunts his sleep, the skulls all angled riverward. He ponders their gaze's target. Did their placer linger right there, gazing up, admiring his handiwork in a forbidden nook? These days, Michael's got his private charts, pinpointed with confirmed spots and hunches alike. He guards them close but tweaks as news hits of fresh chasms or long-sealed grottos cracking wide. Probes rapped, cuffs clicked, but Michael gets the churn of fresh volunteers through SAR ranks yearly. How they master the terrain. How they snag the faith to venture solo with the vulnerable into the backcountry. Some return full tally, others short. And those sinkholes? They persist, unhurried, spilling the range's guarded secrets. Emma had logged 3 years underground before realizing certain noises didn't stem from drips or drafts. She kicked off with escorted jaunts in tourist traps, railed paths under buzzing bulbs, then leveled up to untamed mazes alongside the local caving club. At 25, she handled squeezes and pitches with ease, relied on her kit, and cultivated the steady nerves born of knowing underground freakouts spelled quick disaster. That assurance lured her into a jaunt through the chimney caves, a maze of drops and slits tucked in the ridges beyond Beckley, West Virginia. The moniker fit its core, vertical vents piercing the rock like flues in a vintage homestead, linking tiers with airy flow. A few gaped broad for ascents, others slim to fissures too snug for bodies, yet they hummed faintly with breezes shifting topside. Area speleologists spoke of the chimneys with wary awe. It demanded ropes, sharp navigation, tricky stuff. But weird echoes were its rep. Calls bounced oddly from distant halls, and now and then folks claimed to catch rustles overhead in the vents, rasps and wheezes from voids too cramped for humans. On a chilly October Saturday, Emma joined 3 fellow cavers for the expedition. Leading the way was Joel, the group's guide who'd spent 2 years charting the cave network. His companion, Kristen, managed the rope setups and was known for her scrupulous attention to safety protocols. Then there was Ben, a young novice full of enthusiasm who struck Emma as a mirror of her own early days in caving. Rounding out the team was Marcus, reserved and seasoned, the type who spoke little but intuitively sensed trouble before it surfaced for others. The entry point was a narrow fissure low on a limestone cliff, concealed by thick rhododendron bushes. They wriggled inside sequentially, their helmets grating against the rock, then plunged into a cramped crawl on hands and knees that stretched 30 yards until it widened into the initial vertical drop. Joel secured the line and rappelled down first, his call bouncing back that he'd hit the floor safely and all was good below. Emma followed as the second, easing 60 feet along slick stone into a room strewn with rubble where the roof vanished into blackness. The atmosphere felt frigid, with a subtle metallic tang, typical of caves rich in iron-laden moisture. They gathered at the base, and Joel outlined the path ahead, a descending series of tunnels, followed by an upward pitch through another pit that led to a higher tier boasting the finest speleothems. If they kept a brisk pace, the full circuit should run about 4 hours. Emma double-checked her equipment, ensuring her spare lamp was handy, then trailed the others into a stooped-over corridor that demanded a constant hunch. The initial instance caught her off guard. She mistook it for her own respiration, a damp, pulsing noise akin to air rasping through a clogged windpipe. But her breathing remained even and deliberate, and the eerie sound originated from overhead. Halting, she directed her beam upward to a 6-inch-wide fissure paralleling the tunnel. A steady chill draft flowed from it, bearing that moist inhalations. Kristen spotted her hesitation and inquired if everything was all right. Emma gave a quick affirm and pressed on, convincing herself it was merely airflow over some distant pool in the cave. The next occurrence hit in a broader cavern during their hydration and map review pause. It emanated from a slim vertical chute too constricted for human passage. Beginning as a soft drag across stone, it morphed into the familiar rhythmic wheeze. Ben caught it as well, craning his light toward the top and wondering aloud about wildlife like bats or raccoons. Joel dismissed bats for lacking that timbre and noted raccoons wouldn't venture so far underground. Marcus stayed silent, cocking his head to listen, his jaw clenching visibly as Emma observed. They pushed further in. The corridors tightened, requiring them to proceed single file. Emma held the third spot after Joel and Kristen, with Ben and Marcus at the tail. The trail wound through constricted crawls where they'd need to expel air to squeeze their torsos past rock constrictions. Emma concentrated on her inhales, the next grip, ignoring the overwhelming pressure of the surrounding stone. Yet the noise pursued relentlessly. It filtered through the overhead vents, perpetually out of view. At times it led them, other times it trailed, and during one halt to set up a line for the next rise, Emma could have sworn it originated right above, near enough to transmit a subtle tremor through her helmet against the wall. Reaching the elevated section involved a chimney ascent, a 40-foot upright fissure with sufficient wall protrusions for them to wedge shoulders and toes, shimmying upward sans ropes. Joel demonstrated the method first, then Kristen pursued. Emma lingered below alongside Ben and Marcus, tracking their beams ascending into obscurity. As she prepared to begin, an object tumbled from high and struck near her boots, a polished, orb-like pebble the size of a golf ball. Emma retrieved it, inspecting the damp, viscous coating in her gloved palm. It reeked oddly with a pungent, biological edge. Gazing into the void, she saw Joel and Kristen midway up, their progress calm and precise, undisturbed by any loose debris. The stone had plummeted from a yet unreached portion above. Marcus sidled over and claimed the pebble, scrutinizing it beneath his lamp, before flinging it aside as if scalded. In a low murmur, he urged Emma they had to exit immediately. Before she could reply, the respiration resumed, intense and undeniable, issuing straight from the shaft overhead. No mere gust or drip, it was an entity drawing and releasing breath in a near-human cadence, though subtly askew, excessively sodden. Ben retreated from the edge, his beam jittering wildly. Marcus seized Emma's arm, yanking her back toward the tunnel they'd entered from. But Joel's shout echoed from higher up, questioning the delay and urging them to ascend. Emma chose a path that would haunt her forever. She began the climb, pressing her back to one side of the narrow chute, and her boots to the opposite, steadying herself as she edged slowly higher. The method demanded concentration, endless tweaks, and precise, minimal shifts. She dared not glance upward or downward. She simply had to believe the rock would support her, and her muscles wouldn't fail. At about 15 feet up, she sensed it. An entity shifted above her, not alongside or beneath, but right over her, employing the identical chimney method she was, though heading downward. She registered a solid mass, tangible force bearing down on her shoulders and helmet. A rough edge grated against a backpack, and the respiration sounded so near it seemed trapped inside her headgear, warm and moist against her nape. Emma went rigid. Her every impulse urged her to flail, to fight, to escape. Yet she was jammed in the crevice with no room to maneuver. The creature maneuvered across her with measured intent. And she detected protrusions, perhaps articulated or divided, digging into her backbone. It reeked of decayed foliage and mineral buildup, biting and tangy. Then it was beyond her. The burden eased, and the exhales receded toward Joel and Kristen's position. Emma exhaled sharply, aware she'd been breathless, and compelled herself to continue. Her limbs trembled violently, almost causing two slips, but she reached the summit and hauled onto the platform where the group waited. Joel wondered aloud about the holdup. Emma stayed silent. She only gazed into the void, observing Ben and Marcus emerging after her, their faces ashen and eyes bulging. Kristen spotted the cord first, the one they'd set up for the return drop. It dangled in the chute nearby. Parallel to it, a second channel scarred the stone, sleek and profound, suggesting prolonged use by a substantial form. The mark was far too even for erosion. It resembled a trail smoothed by habitual passage, vanishing into an overlooked lateral passage, far too tight for entry, yet plainly wide enough for transit. Joel proposed recording it, snapping pictures, and returning with superior gear to probe the overhead passages. Marcus refused outright. He argued that the groove's maker shunned intruders, and its choice to traverse Emma rather than dislodge her indicated either intrigue or a probe. Both possibilities spelled danger. They had to evacuate at once. The team divided sharply. Joel and Kristen pushed to press on, to view the stalactites they'd targeted. Ben, Marcus, and Emma opted for retreat. Ultimately, prudence prevailed. They rappelled down via an alternate path, bypassing the chute and navigating toward the exit. The panting trailed them briefly, navigating adjacent vents alongside their course, but it kept its distance thereafter. Upon surfacing, it ceased, replaced by routine echoes of leaking drips and far-off gusts. That evening, Emma examined her head-mounted video. Most of it proved worthless. Jerky glimpses of stone and shadow, but a 10-second segment from the ascent captured an anomaly. The visuals warped, the illumination flaring and dimming unnaturally under the LED glow. Yet amid the blur loomed a form, elongated, jointed excessively, with limbs flexing in unfamiliar ways. It crossed the screen's apex and vanished into the overhead duct. And right before the haze lifted, she glimpsed what could pass for a visage, not mammalian or humanoid, merely a featureless ellipse with hollows suggesting orbits, oriented toward the lens, as though registering observation. She erased the clip immediately. She convinced herself it was an artifact, a play of light, a flare from overbright exposure, but she steered clear of the chimney caves forever. When fellow explorers queried the network, she'd dismiss it as beyond her expertise. Marcus abandoned speleology completely. Ben relocated to Florida, far from peaks and drop shafts. Joel and Kristen revisited roughly a month on, noting the overhead routes blocked by a fresh-looking landslide, though nothing explained its cause. Locals still murmur about the chimney caves, the Keenan vents, and the eerie echoes. Veteran spelunkers, those probing since the 70s, confide in hushed tones that the conduits were never truly vacant. Folks around here claim that an entity has dwelled in the higher sections of these caverns for ages, beyond any written history. It's a creature that tracks prey through echoes and navigates tight crevices no skeleton could endure. They'll warn you that catching breaths in the vents means you halt all sounds. Quit humming, silence your chatter, and exit fast before it descends to investigate the disturbance. Emma's convinced of it these days. She's come to accept that certain underground realms host multiple types of dwellers, and true deference involves recognizing when it's time to back off. Whatever lurked in that ventilation duct spared her life, and she's got no intention of pushing her luck again. Daniel was just 11 when his younger sister vanished from a spot where vanishing seemed utterly unthinkable. The incident unfolded at Crystal Caverns, a tourist-oriented site geared toward families, complete with souvenir stores and structured excursions. It marketed itself as entirely secure for kids. His folks had chosen it as a pit stop on their Kentucky road journey, a brief diversion to ease the extended haul between kin visits. Sarah, at 9 and 2 years his junior, buzzed with enthusiasm about the underground wonder, which irked him back then. She pestered with queries on stalactites and stalagmites, recited info from every display sign, and clutched his hand each time the guide dimmed the illumination to demonstrate true pitch-black void. That day's group was modest. Their clan plus 3 additional visitors, under the direction of Robert, a 15-year veteran at Crystal Caverns. He could name every rock feature, recount the cave's origin tales, and detail all the safeguards erected to prevent straying into off-limits zones. The walkway was concrete paved, bordered by sturdy metal fences illuminated by carefully positioned lamps that cast a warm amber and gold sheen on the limestone walls. Public access excluded any branching tunnels, railing breaches, or opportunities to veer from the marked trail without scaling obvious obstructions. Even after 23 years, Daniel recalls the instant with vivid sharpness. They were in the cathedral room then, a vast chamber with towering arches where moisture trickled from shapes resembling iced cascades. Robert was describing the cave's steady 54 degrees temperature throughout the seasons, when the illumination vanished abruptly, not fading out, but snapping off as if flipped by an unseen hand. The blackness enveloped everything, squeezing against eyelids and erasing any memory of vision. Daniel caught his mom's sharp intake of breath, his dad's urging for composure amid the group, and Robert's steady tone piercing the disarray to assure them the auxiliary power would activate soon. After about 15 seconds, the safety lights flickered on, faint crimson glows embedded in the base to outline the route. Daniel scanned about, adjusting to the shift, and noticed Sarah's grip had slipped away. He shouted for her. His mother pivoted, eyeing the cluster, and demanded her whereabouts. His father glanced rearward, assuming she might have paused for a closer look. Robert tallied heads and discovered one missing. Sarah had evaporated. The excursion swiftly morphed into a frantic hunt. Robert contacted the main station via radio, calling for extra personnel and a complete floodlight activation. In under 10 minutes, 5 workers were scouring the cathedral room and adjacent corridors. They probed beneath outcrops, past barriers, into each nook where a kid could hide or drift. Zilch turned up. No trace of Sarah, no shed items, no hint she deviated from the trail. Daniel's mother broke into sobs. His father pressed for explanations that eluded everyone. Robert insisted repeatedly on the impossibility, stressing no escape routes existed in the sealed circuit with its single entry and outlet. Cops showed up within the hour, trailed by expert trackers and canines. The hounds entered the cathedral room, handed a personal item of Sarah's, a coat forgotten in the vehicle. They prowled the space, snouts low, then halted at a flat stone face roughly 20 feet from the family's prior position. The trainer noted the odor path terminated right there, abruptly, without dilution or dispersion, as though Sarah had approached the surface and simply blinked out of being. Rock experts arrived to inspect the formation, deploying subsurface radar and sound detectors to hunt for cavities or secret channels overlooked in the original tourist prep. They uncovered an anomaly. A slim fissure, masked by flowstone, around 18 inches across, leading to an unmapped tunnel. It was a raw geological feature, plugged with cement long ago amid the pathway's build-out, but fresh fractures had formed, creating an aperture wide enough for a slight figure to wriggle inside. Rescue crews rushed into the cave without delay. Daniel wasn't permitted to join them, but he caught wind of the updates soon after. The narrow passage proved treacherous and shaky, opening up into an uncharted part of the cavern network. It branched off into side passages, featured steep drops, and included spots where the ground gave way to submerged pools. For 3 days they combed the area, summoning experts from nearby areas, yet discovered absolutely nothing. No scraps of fabric, no muddy tracks, no indication Sarah had passed through there. The odor trail halting at the barrier remained a puzzle. The tracking dogs were trustworthy, their trainers swearing the path was unmistakable and strong. Yet beyond that barrier lay only barren rock. Authorities eventually ruled that Sarah must have strayed into the unknown depths and gotten disoriented in a remote corner they hadn't accessed. After 2 weeks, with the tunnel maze stretching into hazardous territory, the operation halted. The family learned the site would stay shut until a thorough stability assessment, and they'd get word right away if anything turned up. Over the following year, Daniel's folks brought in independent explorers. They even turned to mediums. A bounty was posted. Still no leads emerged. As Daniel matured, he carried an emptiness carved by his sister's absence. He sought counseling, managed to cope, completed his education, and in time left the community where folks always saw him as the kid whose sibling vanished in the supposedly secure cavern. But those thoughts of the blackout instant lingered, the sensation of her fingers releasing his grip amid the blackness. He pondered whether she'd released on purpose, or if some force had yanked her. He speculated if terror had gripped her, or if events unfolded so fast that fright never set in. Reaching 34, the very age his dad had been during Sarah's vanishing, Daniel returned to Crystal Caverns. The site had resumed operations long before, following major upgrades. The fracture in the wall was now patched with fortified concrete. Advanced illumination setups with backups were in place. Guided visits began with a mandatory talk on sticking close to the group. Daniel arranged a solo excursion, claiming interest in rock formations, and requested a look at the grand chamber. Bathed in the constant golden glow amid visitors snapping pictures, the burden of elapsed time bore down heavily. He approached the spot on the wall where the hounds had halted, where the smell had cut off. The fresh cement stood out, a dull slab amid the raw rock. He laid his palm against it, shutting his eyes, straining to sense a trace. any hint that Sarah had truly been there, that she'd lived and hadn't just dissolved. That evening in his lodging, Daniel jolted awake to the patter of falling drops. Blinking at the ceiling in confusion, he pinpointed the noise, nearby, methodical, mirroring the leak in the chamber. He propped himself up and flicked the light. The space was bone dry, no plumbing issue, no origin for the drip. Yet it persisted, unhurried and constant, and under it another sound emerged, a whisper, remote and soft, uttering his name. It resembled Sarah, not as an adult in her 30s, but the 9-year-old version. The exact tone and lilt from the souvenir store prior to their descent. He dismissed it as a nightmare, fatigue, the sway of memories after revisiting a site laden with pain. But the whisper repeated, sharper now, emanating from the partition. Daniel rose and leaned his head to the wallboard. From the far side, dulled by padding and space, came her pleas. Where was he? Why had he dropped her hand? Come find her. She couldn't locate the exit. The gloom was overwhelming, and she was weary of enduring. Daniel gathered his belongings and departed the inn before sunrise. He barreled along for 6 hours non-stop, widening the gap from the cavern, but the whisper trailed him. It wove into the vehicle's drone, the crackle on radio frequencies, and the vacant resonance of his residence once he arrived. He began illuminating every fixture round the clock, even in daylight, since the whisper surfaced only in deepening shadows. And come evenings, when rest overtook him unavoidably, visions came of his sister poised in an endless corridor, her arm extended his way, forever out of reach. Much later, a message arrived from the park authority. While performing fixes in a blocked-off zone of crystal caverns, upkeep staff unearthed an item. A violet knapsack, suited for a youngster, lodged in a fissure elevated on the wall in a room without mapped entry. Within lay a composition book bearing Sarah's name, inscribed on the cover by their mother. The notebook brimmed with rough illustrations, basic outlines of corridors and chambers marked with dates from weeks and months following her vanishing. On the last page, a penciled note appeared, trembling and barely visible. It described hearing his voice calling out, yet being unable to locate the exit. It mentioned how the cavern shifted constantly and the lamps refused to remain lit. It expressed regret for releasing her grip. Experts examined the script, confirming it aligned with Sarah's earlier handwriting examples. The book itself bore no traces of moisture harm or deterioration typical of prolonged exposure in a cavern setting. It seemed freshly deposited despite the fact that the chamber had remained sealed long before Sarah's birth. Authorities briefly revived the investigation, only to shelve it once more due to a lack of additional proof. Officials informed Daniel that it was probably a malicious prank, senseless and baffling, but offering no indication of otherworldly involvement. These days, he stores the notebook in a seldom-touched drawer. In the dead of night, he occasionally retrieves it, poring over that closing note while following the curves of her script with his fingertip. His mind drifts to the scent path that terminated against an unyielding barrier, to the search dogs whose instincts had never failed before, to the route that defied all logic by existing at all. He ponders the instant the illumination faded and how swiftly a grasp can vanish amid shadows. He speculates whether the cavern didn't seize Sarah so much as she entered a parallel iteration of it, one never intended to link back to his reality, a realm where doorways shifted, shadows held infinite layers, and escape meant merging with the rock itself. Daniel avoids caverns entirely now. He even steers clear of basements or underground lots, any spot where brightness seems unreliable. Yet at times, he still catches echoes of her voice, soft and enduring, urging him to seek her out. And in moments of solitude, when silence envelops the space, he finds himself replying, murmuring to the gloom that he's searching, that the search never ended, and that he regrets slipping away. The cavern offers no reply. It never has. But he senses it's attuned, just as it was 23 years back when a 9-year-old girl ventured into a blackness that engulfed her completely and withheld her forever. Certain locations don't merely claim, they obliterate. The hardest truth is the uncertainty. Whether she's lingering there, enduring in a cavern variant visible solely to her, or if she ceased existing the second the glow returned and he discovered her hand missing. Madison had long favored paper over human connections. Figures clicked for her. Charts with precise trends and orderly tables in research logs. The sort of structure that never deceived like recollections might. That's what drew her to geology instead of a gentler field during university, and what prompted her to volunteer for the Cavern Charting Initiative in eastern Tennessee at the earliest opportunity. The assignment appeared straightforward in writing. Dedicate weekends below ground with a compact group, revising outdated mappings of an Appalachian cavern network untouched since the 1980s, gauging tunnels, recording features, fixing inaccuracies, and submitting the findings to the authorities. She became part of a 5-person crew. The chief surveyor, a veteran explorer called Greg, had charted networks for 3 decades and regarded the cave as a breathing entity whose layout he knew more intimately than his body. Leah, a graduate student in biology, was documenting subterranean wildlife. Trent, a reserved fellow, managed the distance laser and directional tools. Tyler, a second-year undergrad, hauled equipment and strained to win approval from the others, and Madison, armed with her journal, her passion for precise records, and her conviction that the depths adhered to the same principles as the surface world. The site they tackled bore a formal label on charts and various nicknames among residents. Formally, it went by Chestnut Ridge Cave. Folks nearby knew it as Devil's Ledger, simply the Ledger, or the Crawl, given how much of the explored layout involved cramped, narrow spaces that demanded close contact with the filth. Access began with a modest depression overrun by foliage and thorns, dropping vertically before stretching into a grueling prone shuffle that eventually widened into squat chambers and winding channels. It wasn't suited for visitors. Reaching it required determination, and persisting demanded resolve. During their 5th outing, they tackled a cluster of offshoot routes marked vaguely on the legacy map, but never accurately measured. The overhead clearance seldom exceeded 3 feet, while the ground combined slippery sediment with jagged stone that abraded legs despite protective gear. Progress was deliberate. They established interim markers, captured readings, verified every reading twice, since inaccuracies could compound quickly in the labyrinth of constricted paths that muddled the thoughts. Madison led the way when she spotted the shimmer. They just navigated a brutal constriction, a fissure scarcely broader than her frame, when her beam illuminated something alien to stone or soil. It was jammed at an angle in a shallow indentation against the wall, partially submerged in the muck. She nearly slithered right by it until her mind caught the unnatural straight edge. Reversing course, she disregarded Tyler's grumbled complaint from behind and swept away the sediment with her gloved palm. The item turned out to be a notebook, the inexpensive spiral type available at any university shop. A delicate layer of calcite encased its cover, resembling a sugary coating. Yet the pages within appeared preserved, shielded by that crystalline shell. Madison gazed at it intently, her pulse quickening. It had no business being there. This passage had no alternate access points, nothing suggesting how a notebook could end up dropped and abandoned. Still, here it sat, in a constriction tight enough for single-file passage only. She extracted it with caution and alerted the team behind her to a discovery. They retreated to a broader alcove where they could crouch rather than sprawl prone. Madison cradled the notebook delicately, as if a hasty motion might cause it to crumble. The calcite crumbled readily beneath her touch, exposing a moist but legible exterior. Her complete name was inscribed on it in black marker. Not merely her given name, but the full version. The script was tidy, the ink lines somewhat worn, hinting at years of enclosure after being marked. Briefly, Madison suspected an elaborate prank. She scanned each face, anticipating laughter and a confession of staging it to rattle the rookie, but Greg merely scowled. Leah's gaze widened. Tyler muttered a curse, while Trent eyed the notebook as though it were venomous. With unsteady fingers, Madison opened it. The opening sheet brimmed with cramped pencil script, lines crowding to the margins. The penmanship rang a bell, far too well. The distinctive flourishes on select letters, the firm, low crosses on the T's. It matched her own script exactly. She scanned the initial lines, then paused to gulp down the parched sensation in her throat. The log detailed their morning's descent into the cavern with exactness. The surface conditions, departure time from the vehicles, Tyler's muddy tumble at the initial descent, and his casual chuckle. It referenced a quip from Leah about the cave insects, an inside detail unknown to outsiders. The header read 9:18 a.m. 30 minutes prior. "All right," Tyler blurted, his tone booming in the confined area. "No chance. This is someone's idea of a prank." Greg accepted the notebook with care and skimmed several sheets. The records persisted, each timestamp aligning closely with Madison's wristwatch. They chronicled the day's events as they unfolded, recounting recent occurrences and foretelling those still to come. On the third page, in her precise hand, Madison encountered, "We discover the notebook during the squeeze and dismiss it as a hoax. Greg suggests extracting and securing it. Leah proposes peeking forward. I insist we refrain." "This isn't amusing," she murmured, despite the absence of any mirth. Huddled in the tight chamber, their helmet lights casting stark, intersecting shadows, they debated in hushed tones over next steps. Leo urged continuing the read-through. If it predicted events, they could sidestep hazards preemptively. That intel, however chilling, held value. Greg advocated handling it as forensic material from an incident. Seal it, label it, deliver it above ground for proper analysis. Trent remained mostly silent, though his unblinking stare fixed on Madison as if she might dissolve at any moment. Madison absorbed their discussion before yielding to impulse and advancing through the pages. Midway in, the script shifted. It remained hers, but grew erratic, the text denser, characters gouged so deeply they threatened to puncture the sheet. A midway entry bore a date 3 days ahead. It outlined a mishap. She would become isolated from the others in an unmapped squeeze. A roof segment would cave in after her, sealing the exit. Her headlamp would dim prematurely. And it warned of 3 hours' worth of breath, possibly 4, before the stagnant air accumulated to induce drowsiness. Below that, a full sheet repeated one phrase relentlessly. And do not go left at the fork beyond Station 12. The graphite smeared into a frantic blur from forceful strokes. She lifted her eyes, chest hammering. Quote 22, she queried Greg. He hesitated, retrieved the survey map, and followed their route with a grimy digit. Quote 23, he replied deliberately. Another 50 feet of belly crawl, followed by a minor split. Left leads to the unexplored stretch. Right circles to the primary path. Madison flipped to the next page. The entry, dated just 20 minutes from their present moment, detailed the upcoming split in the tunnel. It predicted she would push for the right path. It forecasted Greg advocating for the left, claiming their mission was to chart the uncharted sections. It warned she would sense the urge to yield. She snapped the journal shut and pressed it to her torso. The damp earth beneath her knees suddenly seemed overly yielding, as if a living entity stirred just below a fragile layer of rock. Quote 24, she declared. Quote 25. Greg parted his lips, likely gearing up for a debate, but his headlamp sputtered. Once, twice, before stabilizing. A subtle shift crossed his features. He dipped his head in agreement. Right, he muttered. Okay, right. They pressed forward on hands and knees, the journal secured in a waterproof pouch attached to Madison's belt. Upon arriving at marker 12, the branch matched the diagram precisely. A slim left arm plunging into obscurity. A broader right arm sloping upward, connecting to the established trail that Madison recognized well. For an instant, the left passage appeared to inhale, releasing a chill breeze that grazed her cheek and faintly pulled at her gear. She avoided glancing its way again. She guided them to the right. The remainder of the mapping unfolded with uncanny ease. They reconnected to familiar points more swiftly than anticipated. The readings aligned perfectly. No gear malfunctions, no route mistakes, no brushes with falling debris, yet the journal burdened her like an additional load. Each accidental touch evoked visions of the pencil marks reforming within, scripting alternate paths in her handwriting, ones where her decisions led to dire consequences. Emerging topside, they gathered by the rear of Greg's pickup as the waning sun filtered through the branches. Madison unzipped the pouch and retrieved the journal. Its exterior was less sodden, the sheets somewhat puffed but readable. She turned to the central section, to the prediction about the cave-in. It had vanished. The pages remained packed with text, her script intact, but the storyline had shifted. The slot for that time frame now recounted their approach to marker 12, weighing the left detour before opting right. No reference to a cave-in, no echo of the caution against the left turn. The desperate scratches from the graphite had dissolved, supplanted by orderly strokes that seemed eternally present. "Perhaps you misinterpreted?" Tyler ventured, though he dodged her gaze. Leah proposed fatigue as the culprit. Flickering beams in confined areas could deceive the senses. "It's conceivable," she added softly, that Madison had projected her deepest dread onto the text, rather than seeing the truth. Greg stayed mostly silent. He merely accepted the journal with care, paging through it methodically, his forehead creased. At the rear interior flap, he paused. "Madison," he murmured. "Take a look." She reclaimed it and peered. Etched inside the back flap in identical pencil and script was one last message. The characters were pale, as though scrawled in dim conditions with a worn tip. "This isn't the initial draft," it stated. "You hold no recollection of the priors. I'm working to perfect it. Heed me on the next go." She eased the cover closed. The atmosphere atop the bluff grew sparse, the heavens overly vivid. Leah inquired about the content, but Madison merely shook her head and tucked the journal into her backpack. She mentioned she'd copy it out soon, salvage the valuable notes, and perhaps they could determine if it was a clever hoax or something more peculiar. No one contested. The outing had stretched too far. Months elapsed. The expedition persisted. They wrapped up Chestnut Ridge and shifted to a new network, but Madison carried the journal everywhere. She stashed it in her home office drawer and willed herself to ignore it. Her nights filled with visions of wriggling voids that morphed unseen, of dark intersections looping back regardless of direction. In certain reveries, she recalled veering left and sensed stone fracturing in her wake. In others, she relived her end. On a stormy evening, restless in bed, she pulled the journal out once more. The leaves had dried, crisping along the borders, yet the ink stayed sharp. She scanned ahead to the back flap, seeking the desperate appeal from her prior self. It had disappeared. Instead, a fresh phrase appeared, one she knew hadn't existed earlier. "I believe this iteration succeeded." It continued, "I trust you'll forget the reason forever." Madison returned the journal and clicked the drawer shut. She skipped the lock this round. Come dawn, she procured a flame-resistant container, and upon delivery, she deposited the journal within and fastened it. She chided her paranoia, dismissing it as mere scribbles from a mind overexposed to shadows. Still, from then on, she deferred in narrow squeezes. She allowed others to take the lead. A person convinced that time flowed solely forward, with decisions cast in stone, unable to ripple back and alter the route that brought them to that point. On charts, caverns appeared as precise paths and intersections set in place. But beneath the surface, Madison discovered they were far more dynamic. They formed narratives etched into the rock, reshaped across eons, splitting and merging, obscuring and reworking their origins. Perhaps, she mused, those who lingered too long in such depths started adopting that trait. Maybe a fragment of her had rejected a single account of what happened, persistently clawing at the fabric of existence until another route emerged. Regardless of the reason, two certainties stood out. The journal revealed facts, yet those facts could shift. And hidden in the shadows linking Station 12 to that tight leftward squeeze lay an alternate self who hadn't heeded the signals soon enough, jotting down alerts destined to fade from memory. In a log that invariably returned to the identical cramped crevice in the stone, poised for another opportunity to set things straight. Matthew chose the overnight shift at Ridgeview Caverns, figuring underground spaces would offer more peace than lockups. Following a decade as a guard in Virginia's correctional facilities, he was weary of reverberating concrete and clanging steel gates, exhausted by shouting above inmates skilled at turning clamor into a tool. Ridgeview offered a contrast, a visitor-friendly cavern nestled in the Appalachian hills, bustling with daytime excursions and silent evenings. His primary tasks involved security, overseeing the fresh array of motion and audio detectors, securing the souvenir store, ensuring no adolescents slipped inside post-closing for clandestine brews beneath the stalactites. The supervisor, a lean fellow called Collins, guided him around the monitoring hub during his initial shift. Rows of screens broadcast real-time views from lenses positioned along the main trail. An electronic layout highlighted the primary course in green and blocked offshoots in red. Small symbols indicated movement detectors, heat sensors, listening devices. This setup ran pricier than my annual salary, Collins remarked, prodding the display. We added it following a few mishaps, youngsters veering from the path, visitors reporting odd sounds from restricted zones. The insurers demanded evidence. We had it covered. Matthew acknowledged the concern. He knew all about risks. He knew the pressure to demonstrate flawless precautions, even amid a nagging sense that the core issue ran deeper. While the final group of the day departed, he flipped through the worn log of past occurrences. A decade of small-scale issues, graffiti, pilfered keepsakes, the rare inebriated strayer who veered off and got lost, then a spike over 3 years, roughly 5 years ago. Darker matters. 3 distinct attacks close to the cavern's mouth after hours. 2 involved nearby youths who'd crept in. The third, a lady who'd hung back to snap pictures of the structures. Each recounted being drawn further into the gloom by a voice mimicking a companion or staff member summoning them. None caught a solid glimpse of the assailant. The probes lingered under review before being hushed as unresolved. The upgraded detection network went live immediately after the last incident. His debut week passed smoothly. He verified entrances, scanned the feeds, patrolled the deserted walkways, his beam gliding across barriers and hanging formations. The cavern after dark differed sharply from its lit hours. Absent the chatter of crowds, minor noises amplified. Water plinking, far-off creaks from shifting stone, the gentle flow of subterranean drafts. It seemed less a spectacle for sightseers and more an ancient presence, enduring the illuminations out of necessity rather than desire. Come the 8th evening, the alerts activated. Matthew sat in the hub nursing a mug when a gentle tone rang out and part of the layout glowed amber. Sound irregularity in Area D, the display noted. A pickup along the path had exceeded limits. He slipped on the earpieces and pulled up the recording. Initially, just the familiar patter and drone he'd attuned to. Then a female voice surfaced, soft, yet clear. Sounded mid-20s, inquiring, quote, 28. The delivery held wariness without panic, as if she'd just noticed the glow fading unexpectedly. Matthew reviewed footage from Area D. The images captured a vacant corridor segment, fences, walls, nothing else. He looped the sound. Identical phrasing, steady ambient levels, no shifts in echo or position. It resembled a snippet looped in unchanging space more than spontaneous talk. Bug in the works, Collins dismissed when Matthew brought it up later. Tech's brand new. Likely the program glitched and tagged old tour dialogue. Matthew hoped that held water. Yet the following evening brought fresh trouble. Another spot, separate listener. Now a male tone, edged with strain and hushed. Do not go that way. I heard something. The phrase rang crisp, like uttered mere steps from the device. The feed displayed only a deserted bend in the path, wrapping around a pillar with no sign of life. Reviewing the case files again, he noted that one assault survivor, the photographer, had reported to authorities hearing a male voice in the shadows, cautioning her against the narrow trail by the disused side door. Instead of heeding it, she pivoted toward the sound and stumbled straight into an attacker's grasp. Over the following 7 days, the monitoring setup detected 3 additional irregularities. These were isolated vocalizations in zones that ought to have been deserted well past shutdown. The exact phrasing varied, yet a clear trend surfaced. The utterances were designed to redirect someone, cause a pause, or expose their rear to the spot they'd left moments before. Quote 29, quote 30, quote 31, quote 32. The guides relied on mics to deliver their informative talks, while the entry area broadcast canned warnings on precautions. Matthew speculated whether the detection array was somehow dipping into those stored files and injecting stray sounds into the real-time stream. Collins dismissed the idea outright, insisting the setups ran on isolated grids with no overlap. The oddities got documented and sent over to the firm behind the installation. Their experts recommended a tune-up, perhaps due to outside factors like weather. Then the movement notifications kicked in. On a Wednesday evening at 11:23 p.m., a detector by the blocked West Passage lit up. The display map glowed crimson, and a screen shifted to the matching view. Just a vacant barrier, a _quote_33_ placard, and the dark void of a secured barrier. Zero activity. It reset in 5 seconds flat. Half an hour later, that same device activated repeatedly. The footage revealed emptiness. No buzzing bug, no dripping moisture, nothing but void. The subsequent evening, another trigger fired on the primary walkway, right beneath a microphone that had captured a voice 2 days prior. Matthew monitored the broadcast in real time, his gaze darting from the layout to the image. Briefly, the atmosphere on screen appeared to waver. Illumination from the path lamps bent slightly, akin to ripples over sun-baked pavement. The signal dropped, and the picture stabilized. He extracted the recording and examined it second by second. There it was. A vague, human-like ripple, roughly the stature and breadth of an individual moving across the trail. No sharp outlines, no details. Merely a gentle bending of rays, as if the cavern had drawn breath and rippled. He kept that segment from Collins. Rather, he began charting the incidents on his own. He output the cavern diagram and plotted every voice, every unaccounted stir, every flicker. patterns clustered, one by the entry, another at a twist in the route tied to an earlier attack. A third hovered around a long-shuttered portal to a decommissioned part of the network, off the current itinerary. That obsolete zone nagged at him. The vintage blueprints in the files tagged it as the Echo Loop, a slim, winding tunnel that looped into a bow shape, plagued by stale ventilation and uneven ground. Back in the day, before stricter regs, the excursions routed through it. Guests often griped about vertigo and fright. Folks described sounds trailing them that proved to be warped rebounds of their own speech. It got closed off in the 90s, following a rockfall that wrecked the platform. Acting on instinct, Matthew retrieved recordings from the prior week's visits and sifted through segments where groups dawdled close to the barred Echo Loop access. Amid chatter of snapshots from parents, whines from children about the chill, and recaps from leaders on the past, something subtle persisted. He isolated recurring echoes. Certain lines resounded sharper than expected. Offhand comments lingered beyond reason, murmuring faintly at the threshold of hearing. Yet in spots, the sequence defied logic. Someone would halt, glance at the barrier, then mutter, quote, 34, despite the tape holding no earlier trace of the phrase. In one excerpt, a teen guy chuckled and quipped, quote, 35. A couple beats ahead of a mangled echo of his chuckle filtering through the pickup, drawn out and sluggish. Matthew replayed that bit thrice. The mirth reverberated prior to its origin. Rest grew elusive. His evenings blurred into screens and murmurs. By daylight, he devoured material on low-frequency waves, sound quirks, and mind tricks. He attempted to rationalize it as the cavern's contours generating an echo chamber, a benign lag his mind twisted into backward sequencing. That's when the fresh assaults hit. The initial one involved a 19-year-old from nearby, who sneaked inside post-closing alongside a pair of pals. The group concealed themselves among the trees until the final staff vehicle departed. Then they sneaked inside via a service entrance that hadn't secured correctly. Matthew, conducting his rounds farther within the facility, missed their entry on the surveillance feeds. From what their companions later recounted, the intention was simply to snap a few pictures and challenge one another to navigate a stretch in the dark. Eventually, they lost track of each other. The two who made it out alive recounted identical accounts. Close to the junction by the outdated Echo Loop entrance, a voice they recognized as their buddies echoed from around the corner, urging _quote _36 _. They dismissed it as an attempt to spook them, chuckling it off, but proceeded regardless. His laughter rang out again, nearer this time, reverberating against the barriers. Moments later, a lower-pitched tone murmured words they couldn't decipher. Silence followed, broken only by their frantic footfalls and the erratic chirps of an unfamiliar motion sensor. Matthew located the pair cowering by the exit, scratched and trembling. Deputies from the sheriff's office found the absent teen an hour afterward, sprawled unconscious at the bottom of a prohibited lateral passage's incline, his skull fractured on impact with the stone during the tumble. The descent proved sufficient for grave injury, yet short of immediate death. Though he pulled through upon regaining consciousness, every detail of the incident escaped him. He recalled only the calls from his pals trailing behind, the pivot to reply, and his words bouncing back from some point forward. Everything else dissolved into shadows and a sudden plunge. Protocols sharpened after the event. Technicians scrutinized each latch. Employees fielded fresh press sessions, underscoring precautions while denouncing unauthorized access. Behind closed doors, Collins inquired whether Matthew's logs captured any oddities that evening. Matthew shared the edited summary, sensor triggers, vague audio blips, but withheld a single recording. It originated from a mic adjacent to the Echo Loop portal, logged 3 minutes prior to the mishap. 3 distinct voices featured, the boy's exclamation, "You have to see this! It is crazy!" The distant chuckles and curses from his companions. And Matthew's timbre, crisp as though he lingered nearby, murmuring, quote 38. Yet he had remained stationed in the monitoring hub, nowhere near the tunnels. The setup held his profile in its database. Among his duties was voicing fresh advisory prompts, cautions about barriers, supervising children, notifying personnel of mishaps. His recordings populated the repository. The attraction could pull from it whenever announcements broadcast. From then on, Matthew ditched the automated alerts. He delivered warnings in real time, throat straining if needed. The notion of his speech stored for the site's arbitrary alterations unsettled him. He also ceased patrolling in utter quiet. While on duty, he murmured aimless melodies softly, aiming to mask any subtle echoes the mics might snag. It wasn't foolproof. Occasionally, echoes of his tunes bounced back from locked-off sections, warped in tone, emerging like an unfamiliar figure's murmur. The threshold shattered one blustery March evening. Rumbling thunder vibrated above, dislodging grit from above. Detectors glitched, mistaking quakes for activity. The display pulsed with amber warnings. Matthew confirmed and dismissed them routinely. But a crimson signal flared next. Intricate sequence in Sector A. The gateway. The screen flipped to that view. It displayed the primary access corridor, the robust metal barrier atop the slope, and the void stretching further. There, on the path immediately beyond the entry, loomed a form. That recurring anomaly from earlier sightings, a human-like haze warping the glow of the lamps overhead. It appeared elongated now, sharper in form. As he observed, it advanced a pace. The detector noted it, beeping sharply. The audio feed hummed. "Do not open the door," his voice intoned through the headset, steady and composed. He fixed on the image. The barrier remained shut. Feeds from the upper atrium indicated vacancy. No figure waited beyond, yet the haze on the display extended toward the latch, its edges smeared with motion. In his ears the warning repeated, edged with insistence, "Do not open it. Do not open it. Do not." The barrier on screen shuddered under an external blow. The atrium's alternate lens revealed stillness, an inert panel, but the subterranean sound captured 3 successive thuds, intensifying as though an entity battered for entry. Matthew froze. Clenched in the command seat, fingers digging into the rests, pulse thundering in his jaw. The battering ceased. The glitch on the entryway feed hung around for a brief instant more before fading back into the shadows, much like warmth pulling away from a surface that's losing heat. The warning light went out. The following day, he submitted his resignation. Collins made an effort to retain him, suggesting alternative schedules, reduced overnight duties, and additional office hours. But Matthew declined. He shared the reality, or at least the version he figured another person could handle. He explained that the cavern wasn't merely echoing noises, it was absorbing rhythms. It was capturing speech, expressions, and actions to create its own arsenal. Initially, it deployed static to disorient visitors, drawing them toward hidden areas where a flesh-and-blood assailant lay in wait. That assailant was long gone now, captured in a low-key operation 2 years prior to Matthew's start there. A disgraced ex-deputy who'd exploited his entry to the cave for his assaults. Yet the cavern retained the tactics. Quote, 40. Matthew stated as he neatly folded his uniform shirt one final time. And eventually it won't require anyone at the trail's end when people heed the call. He relocated to a modest flat in a community devoid of tourist caverns, free of karst landscapes, with no subterranean spaces for sounds to propagate deeply. He accepted an everyday position scrutinizing surveillance videos at a storage facility, a varied form of vigilance. Even so, on certain evenings as he shuts his eyelids, faint reverberations of dialogues he hasn't experienced drift in, his own tone cautioning him about decisions yet to unfold. In such instances, he recalls the silhouette at the threshold and how the cavern manipulated him as a looped alert it activated or silenced on a whim. After his departure, Ridgeview Caverns underwent a rebrand. Fresh emblem, updated tagline, heightened focus on wholesome, family-oriented entertainment. Their pamphlet highlights cutting-edge surveillance, ensuring visitor security. If you pay close attention to the marketing clip, you'll catch Matthew's timbre faintly underscoring, urging sightseers to stick to the route. He never voiced that particular cue, but the cavern didn't require his input. During discussions, Colin insists the past disturbances are resolved, the culprit eliminated, and the setup functioning smoothly. Perhaps he truly accepts this. Perhaps he dismisses the radio static as mere glitches. Matthew understands otherwise. Certain settings don't simply bounce back audio, they adapt to it. They lurk in silence, assembling fragments of human habits until they can mimic a voice convincingly enough to coax a person into a couple more strides toward obscurity. Abigail once viewed city myths as preliminary sketches of actual events. A single sighting sparks it all. Then dread and years erode the details until just a chilling tale for late-night gatherings remains. That conviction inspired her to launch the channel. In-depth explorations of local myths, cross-referencing ancient yarns with legal documents, disappearance files, whatever might tether a spectral narrative to tangible reality. Hollow Ridge was meant to be merely another installment. It turned into the episode she withheld from posting. The myth was straightforward, like the most enduring ones tend to be. Back in the late 1970s, a bunch of university students trekked into the Appalachians to pitch tents close to the entrance of an uncharted cavern. They were spotted last at a filling station 2 communities distant, purchasing brew and marshmallows while guffawing raucously. 7 days passed before searchers discovered their site at Hollow Ridge. 4 shelters, 3 folding seats, a circle of rocks encircling a heap of embers that retained a subtle smokiness. Items were all arranged correctly. Ice chests sealed, bedrolls unfolded, footwear aligned precisely outside each shelter's entrance. Absent were the campers alone. No remains, no stains, no evidence of conflict, merely equipment poised for owners who never returned. With time, embellishments built up, layer by layer like deposits on rock. A few claimed the brew in the drip pot stayed lukewarm. Others insisted a cassette device inside one shelter held its final 5 seconds threadbare, as though an event had been captured and wiped repeatedly. The cavern at Hollow Ridge evolved into one of those spots where residents deterred youth from approaching without stating reasons. Abigail and Josh arrived on an overcast afternoon in late September. Navigating an uncharted woodland route, her study notes labeled as navigable for vehicles with ample ground clearance. Her sport utility vehicle grumbled but prevailed. Their strategy was straightforward. Trek inside, establish their campsite approximately where the original had been, capture supplemental footage prior to dusk, then record direct-to-lens chats after nightfall with the cavern opening in the backdrop. They'd executed this routine across a dozen sites before. The components felt routine, solely the terrain differed. The Hollow Ridge route was more hint than trail, a subtle groove in the earth, sporadically indicated by faded markings daubed on trunks long ago. The atmosphere felt chillier than autumn's onset warranted, carrying a moist edge that stuck in the throat. Abigail led with the satellite navigator, Josh trailing with the stand and gear bag. Each exhaled with sufficient effort to mist the air. Upon reaching their destination, they spotted the abandoned campsite right where the topographic map had marked it. A level patch of earth positioned slightly below the ridgeline, encircled by hemlocks and laurels, roughly 30 yards from a shadowy cave entrance looming in the hillside. The passage of time had erased its marks. No tents remained, no chairs, no signs of the former setup, though the open area somehow still seemed deliberately laid out, as though prepared for a revival. Quote 41. Josh commented, lowering the tripod bag. Quote 42. They pitched their tents in a casual half-circle, mirroring the crime scene diagram Abigail had pored over. 2 positioned nearer the fire pit, the third set slightly farther under a tree's canopy. She resented how effortlessly they replicated the arrangement. It was like slipping into another person's blueprint. Nevertheless, she reminded herself, precision enhanced the narrative. They constructed a fresh fire ring within the weathered stones, collected fallen branches, and soon had a blaze roaring as twilight fell, with smoke rising into a sky growing heavy with overcast. They captured the daylight footage initially. Abigail positioned herself near the cave entrance, her hair tied back to fend off the moist wind, and spoke directly to the camera about statistics on disappearances, how the 1970s blended emerging liberties with shoddy documentation. She gestured toward the blackness behind her, describing caves as transitional zones, boundaries separating secure territories from perilous unknowns, the documented from the speculative. Josh oversaw the sound levels, now and then intervening to tweak her lavalier mic or prompt a retake. By the end, the final rays had vanished from the forest. Darkness enveloped the ridge abruptly, like a drape descending instead of gradually dimming. They dined in their folding chairs, flames snapping between them. The cave's void a stark, empty silhouette in the distance. The surrounding forest held a distinctive silence, the kind mountains adopt before a storm shifts in. No bugs chirping, no breeze stirring, only a weighty hush. Abigail proposed readying the nocturnal recording. Their intent was to simulate the final moments of the original campers. Cheerful chatter by the fire, followed by a closing scene where she'd approach the cave while voicing the myth's multiple conclusions. For effect, she'd reproduced images from a microfilmed news piece, fuzzy shots of the initial site, complete with tents, seating, and a battered cooler. Quote 43, Josh said, angling one nearer the firelight. Quote 44, the image depicted 4 tents, a main fire area, and a row of equipment on the dirt. A lantern, a collapsed chair, a steel container. Amid their own fire's glow, Abigail caught a detail overlooked in the records. A murky form lurked at the cave's edge behind the tents, barely in frame. Perhaps just a shadow, perhaps a silhouette. She edged in for a better look. The pixelated ink blurred under scrutiny. Easy enough to brush off, she thought. Exhaustion was playing tricks. Immersing in folklore always tricked her into spotting illusions. She pushed the print away and grabbed the following one. Midway through the pile, she halted abruptly. A broader aerial view of the site, likely snapped by a ranger from the ridge above, revealed tents that weren't the expected 1970s A-frame canvases, but contemporary dome styles in synthetic material, one bearing the identical two-tone pattern as hers. A sturdy plastic cooler sported a recognizable brand on top, alongside a tripod, a camera bag, and 2 jacket-clad shapes paused in motion, heading for the fire. Shapes whose profiles eerily resembled her own and Josh's. The partial caption below, truncated by the printout, stated, _quote _45 _ this isn't amusing, she said, her tone fragile. Did you tamper with them? Josh raised his palms, genuine bewilderment in his gaze. Abby, I swear I didn't alter your files. You ran those off at home. Recall? You messaged me griping about the library machine. Perhaps a follow-up feature included reenactment images. You know, for an anniversary story. Let's wrap up the nighttime footage first, she insisted, steadying her nerves. We can debate any oddities in the prints tomorrow. They positioned the camera, capturing the cave entrance in the background as Abigail launched into her prepared monologue. She delved into legends of temporal cycles, haunted sites trapped in endless loops, and humanity's compulsion to mirror our losses in strangers' vanishings. Midway through her line on ceremonies, a subtle snap echoed from the trees past the lens, a camera shutter's telltale noise. She froze mid-word. Josh glanced up from the screen. Hear that snap again? Closer now, from the side. Abigail pivoted deliberately, eyes probing the gloom outside the fire's reach. The forest formed a web of silhouettes and bark, utterly motionless. Likely just a twig snapping, Josh dismissed a bit too hastily. She nodded as if convinced, and powered through to the end. To her, her delivery rang hollow, overly scripted, like impersonating her own enthusiasm. Back at the tiny display for playback, the sound picked up not only her script, but a ghostly underlayer of murmurs that didn't fit. "Catch that?" she pressed. Josh huddled closer, slipping on the headset, his forehead creasing. It echoed their banter, phrases from the day's trek, bits of humor, unfinished ideas. The sequence was jumbled, resembling someone fast-forwarding through a full day's audio, snippets bleeding into now. "Mic malfunction," Josh muttered, yanking off the headphones and dropping them harder than needed. "We'll edit it out later. Sort of ideal, huh? Even got that eerie natural echo chamber feel. Ideal. If you're watching, we didn't make the upload. Abby, seriously. We aced the setup. Stay out of the cave. Josh? Josh! Stay away from the cave!" But her lips stayed sealed. The plea reverberated from the void, looping twice more. The next a touch lagged, the one after drawn out grotesquely, raising chills. Beneath lurked Josh's yells, words lost in the murk. Then came footfalls on stone, a struggle, a gasp abruptly stifled. Abigail advanced a few paces toward the opening before an inner grip yanked her back, like fingers snagging her nape. Flashes of every vanishing she'd studied, sparse accounts of folks last spotted plunging into thickets, swarmed her thoughts. She halted. The echo of her own caution, whether it came from some future self or one who had already ventured ahead, lingered in the atmosphere. Instead of pressing on, she retreated, snatching her keys and the backpack containing the hard drives, abandoning the tents and cooking supplies right where they lay. She skipped calling Josh once more. The thought of whatever might respond was unbearable. By the moment she arrived at the SUV, dawn had blurred into a hazy streak along the skyline. Her fingers trembled so violently that she fumbled the keys 2 times before managing to start the motor. As she navigated the bumpy track, she avoided glancing into the rearview mirror. She couldn't stomach the chance of spotting their sight from another perspective. Captured precisely like a faded snapshot from an unread archive. 2 days afterward, the Rangers discovered the encampment pristine and untouched, save for a vanished tent and a lone trail of boot marks heading toward the cavern but never emerging. Abigail fielded all their inquiries, displayed the video clips, and ran the sound files for them. Within the tapes, those swirling murmurs registered as mere whispers, a subtle specter beneath the night's static, simple enough to chalk up to static. Yet her first alert from the cave came through sharply, along with Josh's final cry. The formal account deemed it a vanishing, left open-ended. She held back from releasing the Hollow Ridge installment. The materials rest on a storage device tucked in a carton within her wardrobe, marked with labels and timelines, akin to her other endeavors. On certain evenings, amid the apartment's deep silence, faint echoes of her voice drift from the adjacent space. Phrases she's certain she captured during past recordings, or ones she hasn't uttered yet. She won't revisit the Hollow Ridge material, not out of dread for some revelation in the audio, but from fear that silence will greet her entirely. Nothing to confirm the peaks whispered through their tones. No trace that Josh uttered anything once he crossed into the shadows. In her view now, urban myths aren't preliminary sketches of the past. They're alerts from souls who escaped too late, cycling endlessly until an ear finally tunes in. Hollow Ridge boasts a fresh stanza concerning a pair of additional trekkers who mirrored the tale all too faithfully. She wishes no one else ever spots their own reflection in it as she did. Huddled beside a blaze, ink from old papers staining her hands.